From the streets of London and the backroom and basement clubs to front pages and the living rooms of the nation and beyond, the Sex Pistols' rapid rise was the story of a band out to change the way people thought, dressed and acted. A band out to destroy rock and roll as we knew it. In a little over 2 years, this quartet threatened to bring down the twin totems of the British monarchy and the political establishment. Along the way, they galvanized a new generation of disaffected youth to rise up and take control of their own destinies in the name of punk. Few bands can truly claim to have changed the course of their culture, but the Sex Pistols are undoubtedly one of them. This is how they did it.
We're brought up to believe that pop culture had peaked in the 60s and there wasn't going to be anything left.
But they changed everything, you know, that's it.
We was industrious lads, you know, we weren't sitting on our asses, but we wanted to do something.
Get up!
It started in London in the mid-70s when Britain was in a state of cultural decline and economic turmoil. The striking unions were embarking on 3-day working weeks as the government struggled to control them, and vast piles of uncollected rubbish accumulated in the streets. Race hate was on the rise, unemployment was reaching new highs, and the music was dull.
In 1967 there'd been the kind of flower power and hippiedom, and it was going to be free love, and you could, you know, smoke joints, and it's going to be black and white people all going to live together, and it was all going to be lovely. And I guess 10 years after all that happened, the society was probably the same as it was in the 50s or 60s, but probably even worse.
A very depressive time, you know. The youngsters, you know, just there was no hope. It was very bleak. They couldn't see what the future was, and they were looking for something to latch onto. You know, musically at the time it was all, you know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and, you know, ELO and, you know, all these big punk rock bands.
A lot of the kids were sort of glam fans, but Bowie had moved into kind of stadiums now, so they felt that he wasn't theirs anymore.
The initial power, the burst of rock and roll from the 50s had kind of worn out, gone through the hippie thing, so by the time you get to 74, 75, it'd run out of energy.
And there weren't much going on. You know, the glam rock thing had died down. There was all these big bands you could go out and see at Wembley if you kind of could be bothered. You know, it was the 16 Wives of Henry VIII and On Ice. You know, what's that got to do with us? You know, like 25-minute long songs. It was bollocks.
And also the other side of that was singer-songwriters, generally from the hippie scene originally, but now writing quite sort of whingy stuff about how it had all gone wrong, which they seem to be benefiting from financially at the same time. A total case of cake and eat it. There needed to be something else, which was something much more street level and accessible for the young rock fan.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That change came in the shape of punk, whose roots in Britain lay in fashion. Specifically a clothes shop called Sex, run by art school graduates Malcolm McLaren and designer Vivienne Westwood on the fashionable King's Road.
A very important thing about Malcolm McLaren, which he understood very wisely, when kids wandered into his shop because they were bored and they were quite interested in what he was selling, but they didn't have any money to buy anything, he let them hang around. He didn't throw them out. He understood absolutely that having these kids hanging around, something cultural might coalesce. Glen Matlock was working behind the counter on a Saturday.
It was a weird place. It was like this. It was set in World's End, and down the road you had Granny Takes a Trip, where the Rolling Stones and the Faces got their kind of dandy fashion clothes from. Down the road the other way you had Alcasura, where all the glam rockers got their stuff, and then there'd be Anthony Price and Brian Ferry swanning past. And Malcolm thought they was all a bunch of tossers, so we did too. They were all multi-millionaires, or we thought they were, and we didn't have a pot of piss in, but we kind of laughed at them. You know, you'd see them in a pub. And it just gave us a good attitude right from the get-go. And then Steve and Paul started coming in. Steve mainly to nick things, I think.
Steve and Paul grew up in Shepherd's Bush. They went to school together. And while Paul had a fairly nice, grounded kind of upbringing, Steve, for want of a better expression, was a troubled child from a broken home who kind of found solace in being a little bit of a lovable rogue. And, you know, it was shoplifting, it was nicking cars, it was all this kind of thing.
And they'd go down to the gigs, and Jonesy would borrow a few guitars and things, maybe borrow a few microphones. And this is how he got the gear together to put the band together in the first place. So they were living the rock and roll dream. I think that was the dream to get out. You're either a boxer or a rock and roller or a footballer. And he's actually not a bad footballer, but he's never going to be a professional footballer. So rock and roll was a route for him.
And Steve and Paul had a band going, and I think Paul's brother-in-law was in the band but as a bass player, but he weren't turning up or taking it seriously. I don't think there was anything to really take seriously at that stage, but I overheard them talking because they was trying to get Malcolm involved somehow. And I said, well, I'm playing bass, you know, I'll come down and have a play with you. So that was it. So we formed the band.
Then I think McLaren, you know, thought that there's something going on here. You know, the fact that they wanted to do something. I don't think maybe music was his first thought, but it became a way for him to export his ideas and to sell himself. You know, the guy's a egomaniac and certainly an entrepreneur, and that's what he wanted to do. He was just as angry as everybody else that he, you know, was failing and wanted to succeed.
Well, he knew that he had these guys back at the shop. He had Steve and Glenn and Paul, and he wanted someone to kind of front the band. And then suddenly this green-toothed Dickensian character walked in, and the rest's history.
Lydon was charismatic and sported a look totally at odds with his contemporaries. His hair was cropped and dyed green. His clothes were homemade or accessorized with pins, tears or slogans. It was a look born out of poverty and disgust, and it was enough to gain Lydon an audition, singing along to Alice Cooper's 18 on the Sex Shop jukebox. Though a tuneless rendition, Lydon contorted his body and threw himself around, a strange, sinewy collision of Iggy Pop and Richard III, offset by a manic glare that was a result of a bout of childhood meningitis. Jones gave Lydon a new nickname, Johnny Rotten.
He was bored of rock, because rock had got really, really boring. So the Pistols for him was just a chance to put two fingers up at rock music and just like basically take the piss out of it, really.
I don't have any heroes. They're all useless. But there's no bands around, is there? None. None that are accessible.
You know, everything about him was kind of like, there was this sort of self-hate, but it wasn't in a way. I think it was more interesting than that, because it was kind of like saying, look, I'm right, you know, all right, you think I'm the kind of like the scrawny, snotty, ugly little runt, but actually you're all wrong. I'm actually brilliant, and what I believe in is right.
The band were far from accomplished, but they had attitude, ideas and, thanks to McLaren, a rehearsal space in Soho's Denmark Street.
There was a lease for sale in Denmark Street. It said £10 Allen. Malcolm said, call them up, offer them £1,000 without seeing it. I thought, called the bloke up and I said, look, I think my mate's mad, but he's offered you £1,000 without seeing the place. And the guy said, oh, I think we can talk business. So we went to check it out, and it was this place out the back of one of the music stores in Denmark Street. And then we had a base, you know, somewhere to live and somewhere to rehearse. It was like on 2 floors. You know, and then what we would do, we would go, you know, we didn't rehearse for long, but we'd meet up practically every day. It was a base, and we would knock an idea around. You know, I'd bring in something, and oh, that's all right, I'm not sure about that bit, and Steve had, oh, I've got an idea, I'm not sure about that bit, so let me change this around a little bit, and then John would have a bag of lyrics, you know. Pretty Vacant was one of the very first songs.
It just has a great build to open. The track has a great build, you know, and then the smash chords coming in, and you know there's no point in asking, you got no reply. You know, we're so pretty, or so pretty vacant. This is what we are. Right? Okay, we're pretty vacant. We're pretty vacant. We're useless. We're nothing. We haven't got any jobs. There's no hope, whatever. And you know, we've got nothing really to say. Okay, right? That's exactly what we are. But that's not going to stop me speaking my mind.
It was their most successful song in really drawing the flare wearers into the whole kind of bondage-strided world of punk rock. I think a lot of floating voters were pulled in. It seduced the mainstream because it had a lovely Glen Matlock tune. You know, that is the great thing about Glen Matlock. He gave them the tune to Pretty Vacant. If he'd only given them that, you know, job done. It was absolutely brilliant.
I mean, Glen Matlock's probably the most musically proficient in the very, very early days. A really good bass player. Probably a bit overcomplicated, you know, some of the bass lines he's played. But a really great songwriter as well. Glenn actually wrote the lyrics for Pretty Vacant as well, which people forget. And they're some of the best Pistols lyrics, aren't they? It's, that's the anthem, pretty well sums up the Pistols, and he wrote the words, but I mean, he hardly ever gets the credit for that, does he?
The Pistols began gigging around London during the early months of 1976. It was a time when the wrong haircut could get you beaten up, but also get attention. And the Pistols got both in abundance.
I set up the first couple of gigs. I set up one at Central School of Art, and then I set up another one at St Martin's School of Art. It was just across the road from where we was rehearsing.
I think it was just in the common room there, you know, played to about 12 people, sporting Bazooka Joe, who was actually fronted by Adam Ant. It was Adam Ant's band before he put the Ants together. And after the gig, Adam left Bazooka Joe and started putting the Ants together because he was so blown away with the Pistols. But basically their attitude, you know, right from the start they're on stage and lines insulting the crowd. They don't care if the crowd likes them or not. When I say crowd, there's 10 people. There's no one there at all. Just a few art students of Glen who got to come and see the band.
Their followers were, you know, very small in number, and then it sort of grew and grew. People realised, they thought, God, this looks good. It looks good. It sounds good. It feels good. But it was a very sort of small number of people to begin with, and it kind of, but it took, I guess, it took 6 or 7 months for it to kind of build up any kind of real momentum.
Some funny things were happening. He said, we were playing at some college up Finchley Road. Well, okay, so we'd got a little van together and we go up there, and they'd never heard of us, but we was there with all our equipment. No, we're booked. Malcolm's told us, you know, like we're played, and then we went somewhere else. No, we've never heard of you, and it happened about half a dozen times. And I reckon Malcolm hadn't booked his gigs at all. He'd just gone through Time Out and seen a gig on. And there's no support mentioned. You're playing there.
Their early shows showed a small following of fervent fans from the suburbs, dubbed the Gormlie contingent.
I mean, they're basically disaffected Bowie Roxy fans looking for something else, you know. They like the clothes, the Pistols, they like the attitude, they like the music. Then that starts becoming a scene. It becomes an attractive scene, you know. It's sexy, it's deviant, it's dangerous, and that's all the best things in rock and roll.
They were a bunch of people, and some I liked and some I didn't like, the same as any bunch of people you kind of meet. I didn't dislike any of them. I thought, and It was a William Broad who I got on quite famously, but became Billy Idol. Susie was interesting, but I found her a bit stuck up. There was another guy called Berlin who's too camping to all that. I mean, call yourself Berlin, you know. Yeah, it's great.
They were surrounded by people who had lots of ideas, and they were talking about kind of surrealism and situationism. The Pistols just weren't just the band. It was this kind of bigger thing drawing together all these different elements.
Soon the record companies came knocking, and McLaren's entrepreneurial skills led to a bidding war that was won by EMI, who signed the band for £40,000 on October the 8th, 1976. Though only a year old and with a limited number of songs, a recent Rotten penned song was chosen as the Pistols' debut single, Anarchy in the UK.
Get up!
Within 3 minutes, Anarchy in the UK was a snarling introduction to the band and everything they stood for.
We was working with this guy who was our sound engineer, Dave Goodman, and we recorded it. It sounded great. And Mountain was sitting over his shoulder in the control room going, no, it's not exciting enough, I'm not exciting enough. And we ended up going over and over and over this bloody song that's getting faster and faster and losing all the groove and just sounding wrong. We must have played it 200 times over the space of a week. In the end we went on strike. We said, well, that's it, we're not doing it. We've got another way of going about this. And we got Chris Thomason, and we went up to Wessex Studios, and we played it 3 times, I think. And he said, it sounds great, you know, where's John? And John hadn't come down because he thought we was going to be there for another 200 times, and it just sounded right. He knew when it was right.
It's something that really defined John Lydon's style of writing, for us, because even though on one remove it's very in your face, Anarchy in the UK and all these fantastic catchphrases that throughout the song, but on the other hand, it doesn't give you a nice pat answer at the end of the song. Is he saying, I want anarchy in the UK, or is he actually saying there already is? John Lydon would write something very direct and true, but then would leave you to have to work out what the answer to it was yourself.
I remember I heard it in '76, and I was a kid, and just like, this is amazing. It's just such an amazing wall of sounds. You're into it straight away.
The lyrics are just fantastic. Everybody complains about Antichrist and Anarchist, but come on, what do you want? It's not poetry, it's rock and roll. But it's just, I think perhaps their outstanding statement. It's an absolute, it's their manifesto, their sonic manifesto.
What else came out that month? Bohemian Rhapsody. It was just like the opposite end of the scale to anything else that was happening. It was just like, it was a clarion call to arms. It's just like, forget all these tossers. Just like, this one, let's just kick over the statues.
The single gave the Sex Pistols their first TV coverage when they were booked as a last-minute replacement for Queen on the London show Today on December the 1st, 1976. It was an appearance that was to seal their notoriety.
Went on, started doing the TV show, and Bill Grundy came on the set, and he looked really bad attitude, and started goading us.
Well, suppose they turn other people on.
That's just their talk to it.
Which one?
Nothing, a rude word.
I mean, when John Lydon actually swears, and Bill Grundy picks him up on it, he goes, oh, nothing, it's a naughty word. And he looks like a little kid who's been told off. He looks a bit embarrassed to have sworn on telly. He thinks, oh, I've been naughty.
But Bill Grundy pushed him to repeat what he said. So John didn't want, he's trying to make him look stupid. So John said shit quite clearly.
Shit. Was it really? Good heavens, you frightened me to death.
all right.
What about you girls behind?
Anybody who would see that footage now and see how tame it was would just be stunned as to why this became an enormous rip in the cultural fabric of Britain in the late 1970s. Yes, all right, it was early evening, and a grumpy old bloke goads them into swearing, and finally one of them does.
Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty bastard.
Go on, again.
You dirty fucker.
What a clever boy.
What a fucking rotter.
Well, that's it for tonight.
I remember watching it and just thinking, my God, these people are speaking like I speak to my friends. These are real people. They're not kind of this anodyne thing that the camera normally makes people. They're real. You know, they speak like I do, and it was such a liberating experience to see real people on television. And because they were honest and they were just unexpurgated and just came out with exactly what people would say on the street, they were pilloried for it.
Everything that people were frightened of about young people in Britain was suddenly projected onto these 4 men who had no clue why that this had happened. It was almost as if everybody who was pissed off in Britain had finally found something to join together to be pissed off at.
I mean, the whole of the country suddenly knew who these people were and had an opinion on them, and the opinion was that they were, despicable carbuncles on the arse of society, which is, and people probably still think that now.
They just wanted some pariahs, some enemy. They wanted that generation gap. They wanted to bite their pipe stem like their father did when the Rolling Stones came on the television. They wanted to be parents.
The day after the Bill Grundy show, and from Malcolm having to call up to get press on us and stuff, all of Fleet Street were calling Malcolm, and it had just changed overnight.
Would they have existed outside there? Probably. Would they have come through? Maybe. Would they have taken notoriety across England? It's possible. It's possible. But did Grundy do all that for them in an instant? Yes.
Buckling under pressure from shareholders and bigwigs fearful of their beloved dinosaur rock bands being threatened by this snooty new breed, EMI dropped the band a mere 2 months after signing them, allowing the Pistols to keep all £40,000.
Yeah, some of the bands on EMI were complaining about having the Pistols on EMI, but you can't. They're not going to get the band dropped. I mean, if EMI could see a way of making money out of this, they'd have carried on doing it. But I think they thought this band's backed up into a corner. They're going to get nowhere. We're getting loads of flack. We just wash your hands of it. Just give them the check. Go away.
I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, quite simply, the nice ladies in the packing department refused to pack any more records while the Sex Pistols were on the label. They didn't want to touch this filth that they'd read about in the tabloids. It was also about the fact that EMI were trying to sell records. They were trying to make money. They weren't about starting some socio-political movement that was going to change the world. They didn't care about that. It was a multinational corporation. They just wanted to make money. It's the music business, which is like probably 10% music, 90% business. Money talks, bullshit walks, and the way the EMI people looked at it, the Sex Pistols were about as much bullshit as they could take, and the sooner they walked, the better.
Well, I remember knock on the door, and this woman, she goes, Glenn, you must come and answer the phone. The Daily Mirror from England is on the phone. I'm what? So, and we'd all been out the night before, and I'm like, ugh. So I go and answer the phone, and you've just been sacked from EMI. How do you feel about that? I'm sort of being sarcastic. I've gone, oh, that's nice, isn't it? It's the first thing that's come into my head in the morning, and then it's like Daily Mirror. Glen Matlock from Sex Pistols thinks it's nice that, and I was being facetious. Then John's read, oh, you think it's nice? No, I don't think. So there was this kind of tension and a friction.
Creatively, the group thrived on friction. But as they found themselves spending more time touring together and with increased scrutiny in the spotlight of a critical media, division became apparent, most notably between Rotten and Matlock.
I mean, the way Glenn tells it is obviously that that Rotten, once after the Bill Grundy incident, Rotten suddenly became this monster which the media had kind of cast him in the role of, and that he the Johnny Rotten character really started kind of getting into full throttle.
Well, just me and John with chalk and cheese, he enjoys being an obstreperous kind of customer, and I like just rolling up my sleeves and getting on with it. I remember I had a meeting with Steve, Paul and Malcolm in Covent Garden. It was like, well, can't you just pretend that you like John? I said, well, I don't see... Yeah, I could say, well, yeah, I can, and keep my job in the band. Or not. And I said, well, I joined the band to be me, not try and be something I didn't want to be. So I said no.
Johnny felt very alienated from the rest of the band. He didn't feel he had an ally in the band. Everybody in the band had been there before him. Malcolm, Paul, Steve, Glenn, they were all part of this little clique. They were very close. John was on his own. Suddenly they were getting attacked in the streets. It was just a really bad, scary time. And John just wanted someone on his side.
But I don't think Malcolm McLaren helped. And that was actually a major form of his management as things went along. Malcolm McLaren didn't help. I think that's probably a fair way to sum up his management style.
But then Malcolm had second thoughts, and he called me up. He said, "Look, let's have a meeting. I think I'm wrong. I want you to go and kick down the doors and say, this job is yours." I said, "Well, I could do that, but I just don't like the way you've been playing it. You've been stirring it up between me and John all these years, and it didn't have to be like that. Malcolm's whole thing is, like a state of flux all the time. Keep it. But my thing is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it."
Waiting in the wings was a replacement bassist and much-needed ally for Rotten, his old art school pal and Sex Pistols' #1 fan, John Simon Ritchie. As was becoming the way for punk stars to rename themselves as part of a process of reinvention, Ritchie had recently acquired a new name, Sid Vicious.
It's a double-edged sword with Sid Vicious, because I think he was the worst thing that could have happened to them, and he was also the best thing that could have happened to them.
They could see the sense in getting Sid in there, purely as a selling point, because he was a great gimmick. He looked fantastic. The press were writing about him all the time, even though he wasn't even in the band. He was known, Sid Vicious. Everybody knew what Sid was up to. He had this notoriety, and they knew that would have helped them. But I think musically they suffered for it.
Lemmy has got a great story about Sid. He was saying Sid used to stay in his flat because he had nowhere to live. And he said he come run up day one excited to Lemmy, you never guess what? I'm with the Pistols now. And Lemmy goes, "What? You roadieing for them?" And he goes, no, I'm playing bass for him. And he goes, "You can't fucking play bass. You're the worst bass player ever." Because Lemmy had been trying to teach Sid how to play bass, and Sid just couldn't do it at all.
He couldn't really play bass. He had one bass riff apparently, which was the D.D. Ramone riff, which went da na 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 na. That's what he could play. Whether that really mattered when you watch the Sex Pistols live is a different matter.
Look at that, a living circus.
It was the end of the Sex Pistols as a proper rock and roll band. By the kids, for the kids, whatever that means. And it was the beginning of the Sex Pistols, as was said in it, as the Sex Pistols as a cartoon strip kind of band, playing right into Malcolm's hand.
It came a lot more about kind of the theatre and the controversy and the kind of spectacle of the Sex Pistols. And they suddenly had two frontmen. I mean, there's absolutely no denying it. Before Rotten was the frontman, all of a sudden you get this kind of on-stage tension because Sid wants to be the front man as well, as he always did.
Johnny Rotten was the voice of punk rock. He was, without a doubt, and much mimicked and his ideals and stuff. But Sid Vicious was the look of punk rock. Everybody wanted to look like Sid Vicious.
Staying up all night with the Ramones album and a dose of amphetamine, the punk's drug of choice, enabled him to master the basics just in time to join the band as they symbolically signed a new deal with A&M Records for £75,000 outside Buckingham Palace. This business arrangement was to be even more short-lived. As the celebrations continued, the record execs got to see firsthand what signing a group of pro-anarchy, angry young men in their early 20s and plying them with alcohol actually entails. Mayhem. They were dropped 10 days later.
There are many reasons possibly to doubt Malcolm McLaren's professionalism as a manager, but one of them isn't his ability to get them onto record labels. He got a bunch of kids that had barely played in front of anyone onto EMI. He then, when they got sacked from EMI, got them straight onto A&M. It was another major label.
It was always the wrong label for the Sex Pistols. I think there were a couple of people in A&R who thought they could maybe just get in there and score, but unfortunately the bigwigs at the top were just too scared of it. No, they were making enough money as it was. They didn't need that.
The way telling rock and roll Swindle, look, they make out they've done it all on purpose, but I think at the time they thought, oh Christ, what are we going to do now? We've been dropped again. So they had to go to Richard Branson and go to Virgin, which is like doing a deal with the devil, because Virgin at the time was the ultimate hippie label, putting out Mike Oldfield. But in the end, no matter how much they moan about it, it was the best label they could be on.
So far, the Sex Pistols' reputation and press coverage far exceeded sales or output. Fortunately, they had an ace up their sleeves. God Save the Queen. The single was released just in time to coincide with the Queen's Silver Jubilee in June 1977.
God save the Queen! The fascist regime! They made you a moron! Potential hate bomb!
For me, God Save the Queen is probably the greatest British pop record ever made. Right from the start when the guitar comes in, what adrenaline rush you get off that. When you hear that, you just want to smash things up, you want to put your foot through a window. It's just like, it's pure rock and roll violence. It's utterly beautiful, isn't it? And all the little bits, all the little changes in all the way through. Fantastic chorus and No Future. I mean, originally the song was called No Future.
And we played it as No Future. It was only in 77 when it dawned on somebody about a week before the event that it was the Queen's Jubilee and the first line of the song was God Save the Queen. I'll just change the name of the song, you know. John told me he didn't even know it was Jubilee Day, which I firmly believe.
God Save the Queen for me is a definitive moment, certainly something I would look back on myself, but when I hear that track, everything that was that particular period of time and was punk comes flooding back to me.
You know, I still remember to this day, you know, it's one of the most vivid moments of my entire life, buying God Save the Queen, having not heard one note of the Sex Pistols, buying them simply because they were Public Enemy #1 and I was on their side, and I'm going down to the record shop and buying my copy of God Save the Queen and getting it home and putting it on, and 3.5 minutes later I was not the same human being.
I think it's like one of those moments where like society suddenly splits into two camps. You have people who just think, God, this is like terrible, these people want to have their heads chopped off. And then you have other people saying, God, no, this is exactly what we need. Who needs a monarchy? It's just like an outdated institution that costs us loads of money and it's just like a tourist attraction.
All these kind of right-thinking, bigoted mouth breathers who were going around with iron bars and razors sorting them out. You know, it wasn't just the Pistols themselves. I mean, though Johnny was razored and Paul Cook was hit with an iron bar and had to have stitches. I mean, Jimmy Lydon, Johnny's brother, lost an eye at that time. You know, he lost an eye when he was glassed in the face for wearing the wrong kind of T-shirt. It was an absolutely mental time. There were terrible things going on.
Of course, all the publicity helped, and God Save the Queen stormed to the top of the charts, a position that shops and charts refused to recognise, thereby making it the first #1 record to receive little or no TV or airplay, and the band's name blanked from all top 40 rundowns.
For a start, it's #1, and let's not beat around the bush. It was #1. They pretended it was #2, but that record was flying out the shops. I mean, it wasn't Rod Stewart's. They tried to pretend it was Rod Stewart's, but when I was at school at the time, everyone bought God Save the Queen. Even people didn't like that kind of music, bought it because it was naughty, and it was just a way of like sticking two fingers up the royal family.
The band's debut album was as controversial as their singles. Released on October 1977, Mind the Bollocks would turn out to be their one and only album. But what a record it was. It charted at #1 and has been selling ever since.
The ultimate Saturday night record, even on a Monday morning. It's brilliant. It's a generation gap made flesh. You know, it is the stuff of generational divides. It's fantastic. It's why people are 17-year-olds. It's so they can go out, buy Mind the Bollocks, upset their parents, and just sit there with a nice warm feeling. Job done.
And another thing that's really great about it is the artwork, which is another thing you just get used to seeing all the time. It's a really iconic piece of artwork. It's really fantastic. Jamie Reed's artwork all the way through the Pistols is really, really important, really, really brilliant. But with Never Mind the Bollocks, I think that's the peak. It's just so brutally simple. The colours, the yellow and the pink, really brutal, day glow, simple. It's a work of genius, and you look at it, it actually looks like what the record sounds like as well. It's very garish and bold and pretty wild, isn't it? So yeah, the album comes out, flies at #1, it's one of the best-selling albums of the year.
As soon as they made an album, a conventional rock album with 12 songs on it, with all the singles on it, it just sort of seemed like they were now just a band then. And until that point, for a very strange kind of year, they've been something more. And as soon as they made a long-playing record that you could buy in Woolworths, they suddenly kind of won.
Bodies is apparently about a fan who actually sent an aborted fetus through the post to the Sex Pistols, which, you know, thanks very much, but not really what we had in mind. It's not exactly jelly beans through the post.
Bodies is a very dark, nasty song, but a very powerful piece of music. So it's not just like this kind of day glow, controversial kind of pop songs. There's a darkness about the Pistols as well, which we start to hear for the first time, Never Mind the Bollocks, and hints of what the band could have become if they managed to carry on.
Suddenly this guy was screaming his head off from the position of being an aborted fetus. This was not, a fitting subject for popular music, and he does such an extraordinary. I mean, again, it's one of those records where I don't really know whether he's anti-abortion or pro-abortion. I don't really know. I only know that he's reacted to it so emotionally that he and his band have written something extraordinary about it. Bodies is the only record, I think, that challenges Holidays in the Sun for sheer ferocity.
Holidays in the Sun is this brilliant record. I mean, it starts off with that sort of jackboots kind of stomping on the floor, and then that dang coming in, and it's just like wonderful. And it's kind of quite sophisticated. Again, people might write off the Pistols as being musically primitive, but I mean that song's not. It's got these weird kind of key changes in the middle, and it all kind of raises up at the end. And the way it kind of builds up is really clever. I mean, it's just one of the great rock and roll singles of all time.
It is so hard. It is so frightening. It's so completely intense. There have been records that are much more noisy that have been made since, or avant-garde or whatever. I would honestly hold that compared to Holidays in the Sun and also Bodies, those are the two most ferocious records ever made. And I'm still not entirely. I'd like to say I knew exactly what it was that Johnny Rotten was so angry about, and I'm still not sure I do with Holidays in the Sun.
So it's not saying the Berlin Wall is bad, tear it down, or there's nothing. You don't get anything like that with Lydon. You never get directly what he thinks or what he feels, but you can feel it anyway, just in the sound of his voice or what's hinted at in the lyrics. There's confusion in there. There's contradictory messages. That's what's fantastic about it. Every song's like a little argument with itself.
Well, on the surface, it's about the whole East-West Germany Berlin Wall thing, but really under the underlying theme of it is just this feeling of paranoia and claustrophobia that John Lydon was feeling himself. He couldn't go out. The police didn't want to protect him. They were raiding his flat. Every time he went out, he was attacked by people. And he just felt scared and claustrophobic, and out of that came the whole feeling of this song.
She was such a secret. I don't understand it at all.
Bickering within the band was reaching new levels. While Jones and Cook were content to live the life of outlaw rock stars, Rotten clashed with McLaren to such a degree that the pair rarely spoke. But Sid was the biggest liability. After hooking up with Heartbreakers groupie Nancy Spungen, a graduate of the heroin-addled New York scene, he embarked on a mission of self-destruction. He was soon addicted to heroin and making many new enemies.
The punk thing at that time, it weren't clean cut. You know, people taking speed and drinking a lot and smoking this bit of spliff. But there was never any heroin around in England until the Heartbreakers arrived.
He was already a damaged kid before he was suddenly put into the spotlight, which one suspects was never the best place for him to be. Suddenly, a girl who is obviously far more sophisticated than him, or at least more worldly, certainly not necessarily more clever, but more worldly, is like, you know, following him around like a puppy dog.
They say Sid hadn't even had sex before, which is probably not true, but he never had a proper girlfriend before, so he was hook, line and sinker. She was into her drugs. I mean, he obviously dabbled drugs, he wasn't completely naive, but when they came together, it was just like a downhill spiral.
She was his enabler, it was Nancy. All the time she was going to be his manager, and she was going to be that, and she spoke for him, and, you know, my Sid. It was very much this kind of almost mother and son relationship. It was just this vile, grotesque thing. She was whispering in his ear about he was the star of the band. She turned him against Johnny.
In January 1978, an already fragile and volatile Sex Pistols embarked on their first US tour, a journey that would take them off the beaten track and through the southern states, playing cowboy places where punk had barely permeated. It was to be a disastrous tour.
This show's called Problems for you cowboys.
At some point, a band like this is going to have to go to America. But it's pretty weird the tour they did. I mean, I think it was Malcolm's idea to go through the South, wasn't it? And the Deep South hadn't really heard of the Pistols, and it was a very different kind of plan. I think it was the idea to go down there, cause a rumpus, and come out the other side.
You know, they were walking out and playing to people who were either absolutely 100% hostile, or had read the music press and were in a backwater and were part of that kind of whole thing of going, well, what you do is you turn up to the gig in spiky hair and you jump up and down front and you spit at them, because that's what you're supposed to do.
They went to play this place in Texas, and you know, the first thing he said was, "You freaking bunch of fucking cowboys," you know. It was something like completely not the right thing to say. But when you get to that show, when you see that show, I think while they're on stage, that there's no other intention of like taking it to them and going, right, okay, you're America then, and we know what you're all about, and this is what we're about. And you know, there's an extra sense of violence and spite coming out of them.
Loads of fantastic, iconic rock and roll shots of Sid standing on stage, topless, all slashes on his chest, and he does look really cool. You know, I mean, it's horrible, but it's cool. It's like a car crash, you know.
It was just almost like an insult and affront to these good old boys with their Leonard Skinner records and their Pete Caps, and suddenly there's these kind of faggoty ass kids from England, you know, just coming over there and, you know, just tearing to shreds all that they held dear. It was too early, it was the wrong time, it was a bad decision, and it killed the Sex Pistols.
So I think John thought, well, who's benefiting from this? You know, Malcolm is, because he's getting his lovely band, you know, all this publicity, but as a rock band at this point, it's clear they're going nowhere, and it's certainly John suddenly has absolutely no control over the situation, and you know, he was probably the kind of guy who wasn't going to put up with that.
They should never have been there. Sid was just so smacked up. He was in pieces. And they'd had night after night of these appalling reactions from American audiences bellowing at them, and they were just getting fed up with it. You could see it in their faces. By the time they got to Winterland, you could just see it in Jonesy's face. You could see it so much in Johnny's face. They just had enough.
And it's really fantastic the way Lydon does no fun. They did no fun at the end of the gig, and he just does this no fun. This is no fun at all. And it's just like the way he sings it, you think, wow, that's amazing. It just really is signing off, isn't it, at the gig, and it's actually like quite moving, really, isn't it? About the self-destructs on stage.
No fun. This is no fun. No fun. It is no fun at all. No fun. Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night.
Is it about him being cheated? The band being cheated? The audience being cheated? Everyone being cheated? You know, you can project anything you like onto it, and it's incredibly poetic, but of course kind of sad.
I almost think that Malcolm tore the band to pieces purposefully, because he wanted to control the band completely. And at heart, I think he wanted to be Johnny Rotten. That was at the core of the punk scene at the beginning. Everybody wanted to be Johnny Rotten, not least Malcolm McLaren. I mean, there is a physical resemblance, you know, it has been remarked upon before that there's a great similarity between Johnny and Malcolm. Malcolm wanted to control him, he wanted him to be his puppet. But Johnny suddenly turned out to be a lot cleverer. And I think, in a way, that Malcolm just decided if he couldn't control them, he didn't want them anymore, you know.
The band split immediately afterwards and fled in all directions. Jones and Cook to South America for an ill-advised collaboration with exiled great train robber Ronnie Biggs. Lydon went to New York, then, shortly afterwards, to Jamaica, where he was talent-spotting new reggae artists for Richard Branson's Virgin. And Sid went to hospital. Drink, drugs and all-round excesses had taken their toll. Though the band was finished less than 18 months after their debut single, McLaren was determined to keep the sense of controversy in the name of the Sex Pistols alive. Much to Lydon's disgust, the Jones-Cook-Biggs collaborations were released as a single.
Stupid move! Daft move, really, really bad, idiotic mismanagement, and it was stupid. It was just a daft move.
This was the only thing presented to them. What else were they going to do? So they did it, you know. And they got a free holiday in Brazil, you know. And Steve Jones still says, you know, free holiday in Brazil, didn't I? You know, but it was. I don't know, really.
At the time, I bought it, and I was like, yeah, wow. And for all the reasons that Malcolm McLaren wanted me to. I did, I bought it straight into it. You know, in hindsight, is it the Pistols? Well, not really.
The Sex Pistols limped on, but only in name, with the release of McLaren's The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
It's a great movie to see because of the animation and, you know, musically and, you know, so it's got elements in there, but it's a manipulative, you know, promo from McLaren.
Yeah, it's like Malcolm's kind of, you know, Stalinist revisionism thing. And Malcolm always wanted to make a film, when he was at art school in the 60s. Then I was working in his shop, he was telling me about this movie he was desperate to finish making about the history of Oxford Street and how Mars bars are just total waste of time. So that was his dalliance.
It's actually very, very funny and entertaining up until the very moment that Johnny Rotten isn't in the band anymore. Then it becomes a bunch of really, really hastily written, appallingly scripted sort of scenes.
Well, it was Carry On Sex Pistols. It was very much of its time. It was like a cross between a Carry On film and one of those Come Play With Me films, one of the Mary Millington softcore porn films. It was so 70s. At the time, I remember going along to see it, and as a rabid Sex Pistols fan, I just wanted to see footage of the Sex Pistols playing live. You know, the best band in the world playing at their peak. And all I saw was Malcolm's knob in the bath. You know, well, thanks, but no thanks.
I think he's trying to rewrite the whole thing with McLaren as a singer, really. I think he at that point, I think he thought he was a frontman or something, and management aren't frontmen, you know. Yeah, he's entertaining, he's funny, he had great ideas in the Sex Shop and great ideas in the Pistols, but John Lydon was the icon, you know, and I think that really pissed him off.
Malcolm McLaren was many, many things, many, many good things, but film star he wasn't, and script writer he wasn't. So, you know, the end result is a fascinating mess that tells you quite a bit about the Sex Pistols, quite a bit about the 1970s, but probably more about Malcolm McLaren's chaotic sense of ideas.
Back with his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, Sid attempted a solo career by recording a version of My Way for the movie.
If you're going to have one moment that just kind of describes punk, just how kind of screwed up and how kind of nihilistic and self-hating and destructive it's going to be, but at the same time so just beautifully kind of camp and theatrical and stupid and wonderful, then it's got to be My Way. And
Sid wanted to do something. Malcolm thought, right, Johnny's gone, I've got to make a star. Who's the other star that I've got? Well, Sid's his star. Sid's his star. For God's sake, I can't let him play anything, so I'll have him, you know. And I mean, the video for it, you know, the whole long walk down the step, the gun at the end, you know, shooting the punters. I mean, you know, he chucks the gun down and fuck off and walks up the stairs, you know, as only he could. I mean, masterful. And I'm sure, like, Mark McCann was sitting there just pissing himself, going, this is great, this is great, this is what I need, this is what I need.
My Way's really great, and the bloke who wrote My Way said his favourite version of My Way is Sid's version, isn't it? Because although the tragedy is that Sid did not do it his way at all, did he? He was completely trapped. He's the most trapped, imprisoned person of all time, wasn't he? Trapped by his public image, which he couldn't break out. He wasn't doing it his way. He was John Simon Ritchie Beverly, trapped as in Sid Vicious, wasn't he? He was imprisoned, wasn't he?
When they moved to the Chelsea Hotel in New York, it was the beginning of the end for Sid and Nancy, their volatile and violent relationship further complicated by drugs. In January 1979, Nancy was found dead in their hotel room, a confused Sid arrested and charged with her murder. Let out on bail from the notorious Rikers Island prison, Sid took a heroin overdose and died. In the aftermath, Johnny Rotten reverted back to John Lydon and formed Public Image Limited, who went on to become one of the most influential bands of their time. He met up with McLaren again in 1986, when the singer won a court case against his former manager over unpaid royalties and the use of the name, the Sex Pistols.
John did that because the rock and roll swindle, well, after John left the band, Malcolm made that, and he'd used everybody's royalties to pay for the making of the film, which was wrong. So that's why what the court case was about. John took him to court over that and won.
Malcolm McLaren had absolutely shot himself in the foot by being so both chaotic and intransigent in the court case that he lost everything and now makes not a penny from anything the Sex Pistols do, which isn't really fair on him either. But he made his bed because he tried to keep all this money to himself for whatever his reasons were. So there was always, among the Sex Pistols, I think, an idea of unfinished business.
Rumours of a reformation were rife until 1996, when the Sex Pistols announced a series of summer shows, with Glen Matlock back in the band.
I was in the States doing something and I had a bit of time on my hands. I thought, you know what, I haven't spoken to Steve Jones since 1977. And somebody had his number. I said, oh, I'll give him a call. So I went up and met up with Steve, and he said, let's call John, because Steve and John live out there. And then we went to meet John. And then as soon as we got there, Steve goes, let's call up Paul. It kind of set the seed, and it was this sort of implicit thing. It was like, well, maybe we can do some shows or something.
It was unusual to see, you know, ex-punks or dated punks, you know, there with their kids and, you know, with their colours on and stuff, but they've got their 2 or 3 boys and they got their picnic, you know, and standing and, you know, reminiscing. But you just can't compare that to what you would consider their glory days when they were there. When they were there and it was all real.
If they'd come on and been awful, it would have been better than it was. The point was not that they were brilliant or that they were awful. The point was is they were ordinary. They played a very competent set. It's never, personally for me, what I ever wanted to see or hear the Sex Pistols doing, playing a very competent set of their greatest hits.
It did their reputation a lot of harm, probably, and their spotless legend. But they've got to earn their crust, you know. Punk rock credibility never paid anyone's mortgage. And they earned it, you know, they earned the dosh, and they should go out there and get it if they possibly can.
I mean, it was punk, you know, it's like, you know, why when you break all the rules in the first place, why should you kind of not break all the rules about, oh, it should be some glorious kind of thing left in the past, sort of perfectly formed in all its horribleness, you know.
Just because a lot of like twats at the Guardian say you can't play, that's ridiculous, isn't it? Like I remember them all stood backstage going, it's not very revolutionary. Julie Birch wrote a column in the Daily Mail slagging them off for Reform. You're thinking, you're writing for the Daily Mail. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? You talk about revolution, it's just poxy writers, you're just whinging writers who don't like that kind of music, don't come to the gig.
Also, we could play that music without all the bullshit. You know, we formed a band in the first place to play music. I did, Steve and Paul did, I think John even did, you know. And then instead of playing some scuzzy little gig in front of 30 people with equipment that don't work properly and you get the electric shocks, we was playing, and we did like 35,000 people there, you know, with a big rig, and it just all working properly, like a proper band.
Either way, the impact of the Sex Pistols on modern culture and their influence upon a new generation of new bands is unrivaled by any band since.
However they came in, however they attacked it, however they approached it, they changed the face of music.
I would argue until I'm blue in the face that no rock and roll band has ever had an impact on popular culture as the Sex Pistols have done.
And that energy's kind of gone out all over the place into a really weird place you never expect to find it. Punk ends up in really strange places like architects' offices.
It brought out the background, you know, people who were mavericks, people who were instigators, people who had something to say, people who were rebellious.
If you're creating music that has some agenda other than ego and makeup, then the struggle's going to be hard. But the Pistols prove that the struggle can be worthwhile.